I am Sienna, 34 years old. As the secret founder of a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm, I have quietly built an empire. But last month, as I lay bleeding out, my mother refused to visit because my sister had a hair crisis. Please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Have you ever felt totally abandoned by your blood relatives? Growing up in Buckhead, Atlanta, my father, Reverend Thomas, led a prominent megachurch, while my mother Beatrice worshipped social status. Inside our mansion, warmth was reserved for my sister Serena. I was just the analytical scapegoat. The proof of my insignificance came on a rainy Tuesday. I was driving home when a drunk driver ran a red light. The impact was a deafening explosion of shattering glass. My car was violently T-boned, spinning wildly before slamming into a concrete barrier. I drifted in and out of consciousness. The blaring sirens faded into the chaotic, bright emergency room. My vision was swimming, clouded by blood pouring from my forehead. My fractured ribs felt completely pulverized, and every single breath was sheer, absolute agony. I heard the voices of nurses and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor tracking my dropping pulse. "She is losing blood too fast," a trauma surgeon shouted, his hands pressing against my chest. "We need to get her into the operating room immediately. Does she have an emergency contact?" "I found it," a nurse responded. "It is listed as mother, dialing now." The surgeon instructed the nurse to put the call on speakerphone so he could keep working. I lay there paralyzed by pain, but my hearing was perfectly clear. The phone rang 3 times before my mother answered. Her voice was sharp and dripping with impatience. "Hello, who is this? I am extremely busy right now." Beatrice snapped over the loud background noise of a high-end cocktail party. "Ma'am, this is Dr. Aris at Atlanta General Hospital," the surgeon said, his voice tense. "Your daughter Sienna has been in a horrific car accident. She was violently T-boned and is currently in critical condition. She has severe internal bleeding. Tonight might be her last night if we do not operate immediately. We need you down here right now to sign the surgical consent forms." There was a brief pause. For a fleeting second, the terrified little girl inside me thought my mother would drop everything, scream in horror, and rush to my side. Instead, what followed was absolute chilling cruelty. "Doctor, I cannot possibly leave right now," Beatrice huffed, sounding more inconvenienced than concerned. "Tonight is the launch party for Julian's new luxury real estate project. It is the most important night of my son-in-law's career. Half the elite investors in Atlanta are here, and Serena is currently having an absolute meltdown in the VIP suite because the stylist completely ruined her hair. Her sister needs us more right now. Sienna is a grown woman. Just do your standard procedures. We will try to swing by and check on her tomorrow afternoon if the schedule permits." The surgeon froze, his hands momentarily stopping their frantic work. He looked down at me with absolute disbelief. "Ma'am, did you hear what I just said? Your daughter is dying. We need a family member here right now." "And I said I am busy," Beatrice barked back. "Do not interrupt my evening again." The line went dead. The busy signal echoed through the sterile trauma bay, sounding like a death knell for any lingering hope I had left for my family. The medical staff stood in stunned silence. A cold tear cut through the blood on my cheek. It was a tear of profound, final realization. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness swallow me whole, knowing with absolute certainty that if I survived this night, they would lose me forever. Exactly 1 week later, the doors to the intensive care unit swung open. My parents and Serena finally decided to make their performative appearance. They walked down the corridor clutching a cheap bouquet of flowers, carefully dressed in designer clothes, expecting to find me weak, pathetic, and grateful for their delayed attention. But as they confidently strutted into my hospital room, their footsteps abruptly halted. The hospital bed was completely empty. The white sheets were folded with meticulous precision. The monitors were turned off, and the room was devoid of personal belongings. "Nurse!" Reverend Thomas bellowed, his booming pastor voice echoing in the small room. "Where is my daughter? Where did you move Sienna?" A passing nurse stopped, glancing at the empty room with a confused expression. "Sienna discharged herself against medical advice 3 days ago. A private medical transport team came and picked her up. She left no forwarding address." Serena stepped forward, catching sight of a single crisp white envelope resting exactly in the center of the perfectly made pillow. Her manicured fingers reached out and snatched it up. She tore the envelope open and pulled out a handwritten note. As her eyes scanned the elegant, sharp cursive handwriting, the color rapidly drained from her face. Her perfectly glossed lips parted in sheer horror. Thomas and Beatrice crowded around her, peering over her shoulder to read the words that would inevitably seal their financial and social doom. The note contained only 3 devastating sentences. I signed my own surgical consent forms, and I survived without you. I have also signed the death warrant for this family's fraudulent empire. See you at Julian's charity gala. Beatrice gasped, dropping the cheap bouquet of flowers onto the cold linoleum floor. The vibrant petals scattered much like their perfect, untouchable lives. They had no idea that the daughter they had discarded in a trauma ward was actually the invisible billionaire funding their entire existence. How did I manage to survive the night, and exactly what kind of hell was I preparing to unleash upon Julian's networking gala? The heavy oak doors of the Buckhead Club stood guarded by 2 massive men in tailored black suits. I stepped out of the back of my chauffeured Maybach, letting the cool Atlanta evening air hit my face. I wore a pristine, stark white Tom Ford suit, meticulously tailored to hide the heavy bruising around my ribs. Right above my left eyebrow, a crisp white medical bandage covered the stitches from the windshield glass. It was a glaring, undeniable reminder of the night my family left me to die. I walked up the marble steps, my heels clicking with the rhythmic precision of a ticking time bomb. The guards moved to block my path, but my private security detail stepped forward, flashing a VIP pass that I had acquired through a dummy corporation just hours earlier. The heavy doors swung open, revealing a ballroom dripping in crystal chandeliers, gold-leafed columns, and the suffocating scent of expensive perfume and unearned privilege. This was Julian's grand charity gala, a networking event designed to court Atlanta's wealthiest elite and fund his failing real estate ventures. I glided into the main hall, grabbing a flute of champagne from a passing waiter. I did not take a sip. I just held it, letting the crystal catch the light as I surveyed the room. My parents, Reverend Thomas and Beatrice, were holding court near the center ice sculpture, laughing loudly with a group of white investors. My father wore his signature custom clergy suit, playing the humble servant of God, while my mother dripped in pearls purchased with credit cards she could barely afford. Then, my eyes locked onto the golden child. Serena stood by the grand staircase, draped in a crimson silk gown, clinging to Julian's arm like an oversized accessory. She threw her head back in a practiced laugh, but froze the exact second her eyes met mine. The champagne glass in her hand trembled. The color completely vanished from her perfectly contoured face. She tapped Julian frantically on the shoulder, pointing a trembling manicured finger in my direction. Serena did not walk toward me. She stomped. Her heels hammered against the imported marble floor as she closed the distance between us, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Julian followed closely behind her, his arrogant smirk failing to hide the sudden panic in his eyes. "What in the world are you doing here?" Serena hissed, keeping her voice low to avoid drawing the attention of the surrounding billionaires. "Are you absolutely insane? I read that psychotic note you left at the hospital. You faked a medical emergency just to get attention, and now you show up here looking like a bandaged freak." I looked her up and down, offering a cold, razor-sharp smile. "I assure you, Serena, the massive internal bleeding was very real. But I am touched by your overwhelming sisterly concern. Do not play games with me, Sienna," Serena snarled, stepping into my personal space. "This is a closed, highly exclusive networking event for Julian's elite investors. You are a socially unfit embarrassment. You always have been. You sit in a dark cubicle crunching numbers for a living. You do not belong in this room, and you certainly do not belong near these people. You are going to ruin my husband's reputation just by breathing the same air as his clients." Julian sneered, crossing his arms over his expensive tuxedo. "Listen to your sister Sienna. We all know you have always been bitterly jealous of Serena's success and my wealth. Showing up to my charity gala looking like a battered street rat is a new low even for you. I am trying to secure a $50 million funding round tonight. I cannot have a low-level, pathetic accountant wandering around my VIP section begging for pity. Turn around, walk out those doors, and go back to your miserable, lonely little apartment before I call security and have you physically thrown onto the curb. I slowly took a sip of my champagne, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them both visibly squirm. I did not shrink. I did not apologize. I stood perfectly straight, ignoring the sharp stabbing pain radiating through my fractured ribs. "You really think I am here to ruin your networking, Julian?" I asked, my voice chillingly calm, slicing right through his arrogant facade. "I did not come to this ridiculous overpriced circus to eat your mediocre caviar or mingle with your clueless investors." "Then why are you here?" Serena demanded, her voice cracking with mounting anxiety. "You are an absolute disgrace. You are trying to sabotage my perfect life because nobody wants you." "I am here because this party is a fraud," I stated, my eyes locking onto Julian's suddenly shifting gaze. "And I am here because you owe me something." "Owe you?" Serena laughed, a harsh, grating sound that drew a few curious glances from nearby tables. "We do not owe you anything. You have always been the family burden. Mom and Dad spent their entire lives trying to mold you into something presentable, but you chose to be a boring, isolated loser." Julian is a visionary real estate developer. He builds luxury skyscrapers. You look at spreadsheets. Do not stand there and act like you are in our league. I tilted my head, looking directly at Julian, whose jaw was clenched so tight a vein throbbed in his neck. "A visionary, is that what you call a man who uses his wife's family as a financial shield because his white privilege can no longer hide his sheer incompetence?" Julian took a threatening step forward, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "Watch your mouth, you ungrateful little witch. I brought your ghetto family into high society. I elevated the Adams name in Atlanta. You should be down on your knees thanking me for letting you stand inside this incredibly expensive, luxurious elite building. Turn around, leave now." Before I could respond to Julian's threat, a heavy hand clamped down on my right arm. The grip was punishing fingers digging into my blazer with furious strength. I did not have to turn my head to know who it was. The scent of sandalwood cologne gave him away immediately. My father, Reverend Thomas, stepped out from behind Julian, his pastoral smile replaced by a twisted scowl. He yanked my arm, trying to pull me toward the grand exit doors, treating me like an unruly child throwing a tantrum during a sermon. "You are leaving right now, Sienna," Thomas growled, his voice a harsh whisper to avoid echoing across the ballroom. "You have embarrassed us enough, parading your injuries around like a beggar. I will not let you ruin your sister's night. You are going to walk out those doors, get into a cab, and disappear from my sight forever." I looked down at his hand, gripping my sleeve, then slowly raised my eyes to meet his furious stare. I did not pull away. I did not struggle. I just stared at him with absolute glacial calm. "Take your hand off me, Thomas," I said, my voice devoid of fear. He tightened his grip, stepping closer. "Do not disrespect me. I am your father, and you will obey me. You have always been a selfish girl. Serena and Julian are building an empire, and you are trying to tear it down because you have nothing. Now move." I jerked my arm free with a sharp twist. He stumbled back, shocked by the sudden physical resistance from the daughter he always pushed around. "An empire." I laughed out loud, a sharp sound cutting through the jazz playing in the background. "Is that what we are calling it now, building an empire with stolen money?" Beatrice rushed forward, inserting herself between me and my father. "Keep your voice down," she hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward wealthy white investors by the bar. "Are you completely psychotic? Nobody stole anything from you." "Oh, really?" I stepped forward, forcing my mother back. "So we pretend my Spelman College tuition fund magically vanished into thin air. We pretend you and Thomas did not completely drain the account. I worked 3 jobs to build $150,000, Beatrice. Every single dime of my future wiped out in an afternoon." Serena scoffed, crossing her arms and rolling her eyes dramatically. "Are you seriously bringing up ancient history that was over a decade ago? You are obsessed and pathetic." "I bring it up because that money paid for your ridiculous wedding," I fired back, pointing at Julian. "You needed imported orchids and a custom gown to impress this arrogant man and his relatives. You sold my education to buy yourself a white husband." Julian's face flushed bright red. "My family is elite. We expect a certain standard of luxury. Your family expects a standard they refuse to pay for," I snapped, turning to my father. "You stole from your own daughter. You forged my signature on the withdrawal slips, Thomas. You committed bank fraud to throw a party and impress people who do not even like you. My father puffed out his chest, unbothered by the accusation. He looked around the room, making sure no one was listening before leaning in close to deliver his justification. It was not theft, Sienna, Thomas said with righteous indignation. It was a necessary sacrifice for the family legacy. You were always narrow-minded. You only cared about yourself and your accounting textbooks. Serena marrying into the Vance family elevated our bloodline. It gave us access to rooms we could never enter on our own. It was a strategic investment for the greater good of this family. You should have been proud to contribute to our rise in society. An investment, I repeated in utter disgust. You sacrificed my future to buy a VIP pass into a country club that does not want you. You left me with massive student loan debt. I ate instant ramen for 4 years and worked nights to survive while you bought Rolex watches for your new son-in-law. You did not invest in a legacy. You bought a cheap illusion. An illusion that pays for the hospital you just crawled out of, Beatrice sneered. Julian's real estate developments are the reason we have any standing left in this city. He is a visionary. He took the seed money we provided and multiplied it. He provides for this family in ways you never could. So yes, we took your tuition money and we would do it again without a second thought. Julian actually generates wealth. You just count other people's money. Serena smiled, leaning against Julian's shoulder. Mom is exactly right. Julian is building a $50 million luxury complex right in the heart of Midtown. He is going to be featured in Forbes magazine next month. What do you have, Sienna? A rented apartment and a bandage on your head. You are absolutely nothing compared to us. You are a complete failure. Julian smirked, wrapping his arms securely around Serena's waist. You heard them, Sienna. The adults are doing real business here tonight. We are talking about high-level corporate funding, something a low-level desk worker like you cannot comprehend. Now I am going to tell my security guards to escort you to the sidewalk where you belong. I did not break eye contact with Julian. I let a slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. I reached into my designer blazer and my fingers brushed the leather of a single red folder. You want to talk about high-level corporate funding, Julian? I asked, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register that made his smirk instantly vanish. Because if we are going to justify stealing my tuition money as an investment, I think we should talk about exactly how you funded your latest failing Midtown project. Julian let out a sharp laugh that echoed across the marble floor of the grand ballroom. He stepped directly in front of his wife. He shielded Serena as if my presence was a physical threat to her expensive designer gown. He adjusted the crisp cuffs of his bespoke tuxedo. He shot a reassuring glance at the wealthy investors watching us from the busy bar. Then he turned his full attention back to me. His bright blue eyes were completely devoid of any warmth. They were filled with the kind of blinding arrogance that only generational wealth could ever buy. You really have lost your mind tonight, Julian sneered. He shook his head with an exaggerated sense of pity. You scream about college tuition from a decade ago, and now you want to talk about commercial real estate finance. You are completely delusional. Do you even know who is standing in this room tonight? We have powerful hedge fund managers. We have influential city council members. We have elite international property developers. These are the people who actually shape the skyline of Atlanta. You are a low-level and invisible little number cruncher. You sit in a gray cubicle checking receipts for a very modest hourly wage. I kept my expression entirely neutral. I let him dig his own grave with every single arrogant word. Julian took another aggressive step forward. He tried to use his tall frame to intimidate me. My Midtown project is a monumental success. It is a $50 million luxury complex that is going to redefine urban living in this city. It takes ruthless ambition and top-tier financial backing to build something of that massive magnitude. It takes the elite pedigree that I was born with. You do not have the slightest clue how the high-stakes corporate world operates. He gestured broadly around the glittering ballroom. He made sure his rich colleagues could see him putting me in my place. I elevated this entire family, Julian boasted loudly. Before I came along, Thomas was just another local pastor begging for community donations. Beatrice was desperate to break into the Buckhead social scene. I gave them a seat at the big table. I gave Serena the luxurious life she always deserved. And what exactly have you contributed to this family? Absolutely nothing. You are socially inept. You are furious because you will never achieve a fraction of my massive success. My mother nodded enthusiastically from the sidelines. She beamed at her son-in-law with sickening adoration. "Hi is absolutely right," Beatrice chimed in. Her voice was dripping with venom. "Julian is a titan in this city. You are making an absolute fool of yourself. Turn around and walk out of here before you do irreversible damage to our reputation." Julian held up a hand. He silenced my mother with a single and dismissive gesture. He did not need her help to tear me down. He was enjoying this entirely too much. "Let me make this perfectly clear for you," Julian continued. His voice dropped to a harsh and menacing pitch. "Since you seem to be struggling with basic comprehension, I will speak slowly. I am completely untouchable in Atlanta. I play golf with the mayor. I drink scotch with the banking commissioners. I hold the keys to this entire city. If you breathe a single negative syllable about my corporate finances, I will strike. I will personally ensure that your pathetic little career is permanently destroyed." I did not blink. "Is that a threat?" "It is an absolute guarantee," he smiled. A cold and predatory grin showed his perfect white teeth. "I know the senior partners at every major accounting firm in the Southeast. All it takes is one short phone call from me. You will be instantly blacklisted. You will never work in corporate finance again. You will be extremely lucky to find a job doing basic taxes at a retail kiosk. I will gladly crush your livelihood just to prove a point. You crossed the wrong man tonight." Julian turned slightly. He caught the eye of the heavy head of security standing near the grand entrance. He snapped his fingers twice. It was a sharp and commanding sound. Two massive security guards immediately started walking toward us. Their faces were carved out of solid stone. "You had your fun," Julian declared. He crossed his arms and looked down his nose at me. "You threw your little temper tantrum. Now these gentlemen are going to grab you by your arms. They will drag you out the service exit. They will throw you onto the hard concrete where you belong. I will have the police arrest you for trespassing and causing a public disturbance. Go back to your cheap apartment. Put some ice on your injured head. Pray I do not decide to follow through on ruining your miserable life." The security guards stopped just 3 feet away. They waited for Julian to issue his final command to grab me. Serena let out a loud and triumphant sigh of relief. She was clearly thrilled that her powerful husband was publicly destroying me. My father crossed his arms. He looked incredibly satisfied that his wealthy son-in-law was putting me back in my designated place as the ultimate family failure. They all waited for me to break. They expected me to cry and beg. They wanted me to lower my head in shame and scurry out the back door in total humiliation. They thought they had finally won. Instead, I looked directly at Julian and his smug face. I looked at the guards preparing to lunge at me, and then I let out a slow, terrifying, and genuine smile. Without saying a single word to him, I calmly reached my right hand inside the tailored breast pocket of my white blazer. I smoothly pulled out a single red folder and waited for him to realize that his entire world was about to collapse into absolutely nothing right before his very eyes. I quickly flipped the cover of the bright red folder open. The heavy cardstock made a crisp sound that seemed to echo loudly in the sudden quiet between us. Julian stared at the thick stack of documents inside his arrogant smirk, faltering for a fraction of a second before he masked it with a loud scoff. He genuinely thought I had brought a frivolous lawsuit to the party. He thought I was threatening him with a petty harassment claim or a ridiculous restraining order to get back at my family. He had absolutely no idea he was looking at the exact autopsy report of his entire financial existence. I took a slow, deep breath and projected my voice. I did not yell, but I spoke with the sharp, carrying clarity of someone who knows exactly how to command a massive room. The soft jazz music was still playing smoothly in the background, but the lively conversations at the nearby VIP tables had started to die down rapidly. The powerful hedge fund managers and influential city council members Julian had just bragged about were now turning their heads toward us in confusion. They sensed the dramatic shift in the atmosphere immediately. The wealthy elite possess a primal instinct for smelling blood in the water, especially when it involves their own investments and reputations. Let us take a detailed look at the spectacular success of the Midtown Luxury Complex, I announced, holding up the first printed spreadsheet high enough so the nearest investors could clearly see the highlighted red columns. You secured $50 million in capital funding over the last 14 months from these very people. You promised your elite backers a state-of-the-art urban oasis right in the center of Atlanta. You showed them beautiful architectural renderings, fake profit projections, and incredibly aggressive completion timelines. But according to your actual internal corporate ledgers, not the highly doctored summaries you handed to the Municipal Banking Commission last week, less than 12% of that capital has actually been allocated to real construction costs. Julian lunged forward aggressively, his hands reaching out to snatch the folder from my grasp. I stepped back smoothly, keeping the highly sensitive documents entirely out of his desperate reach. The two massive security guards hesitated, completely unsure if they should intervene in a financial dispute between high society family members or let the drama play out. "Shut your mouth right now," Julian hissed, pure panic finally cracking his polished and perfect exterior. He glanced nervously at a group of older white men in expensive tailored suits who had drifted much closer to listen to my presentation. "She is lying to all of you. She fabricated these papers to extort me because she is a jealous lunatic who hates my wife. Somebody get her out of here right now before I press criminal charges against her." "I am not extorting you, Julian," I replied, my voice ringing out clear and incredibly steady over the growing murmur of the wealthy crowd. "I am simply educating your esteemed partners on where their money really went. The remaining investor capital never went to the Midtown development site. It was systematically wired through 3 untraceable shell companies registered secretly in the Cayman Islands. It was a highly illegal Ponzi scheme. You used fresh funds from newest investors to pay expected returns to early backers, creating a completely fraudulent illusion of incredible profitability, while the foundation of your company rotted away into nothing." Serena grabbed Julian by the arm, her heavy diamond bracelets clinking together loudly as she shook him. "Julian, tell them she is making this up right now. Tell them she is crazy and call the police to arrest her." Julian could not speak a single word to defend himself. His breathing became incredibly erratic. He was staring in absolute horror at the second page I slowly pulled from the red folder. He recognized the offshore banking routing codes printed in bold ink. "He cannot tell you that, Serena, because he knows I have the certified wire transfer receipts." I continued, turning my body to directly address the crowd of stunned investors who were now completely and utterly silent. Julian did not just mismanage the funds due to incompetence. He actively laundered them to cover massive offshore gambling debts. Between May and August of last year, Julian lost $22 million at private high-stakes baccarat tables in Macau and Monaco. When the international gambling syndicates demanded their money and threatened his life, he drained the Midtown project accounts to save his own skin. Your visionary developer is nothing but a degenerate gambler who used your hard-earned capital as his personal casino chips to pay off dangerous criminals. The opulent ballroom erupted into a sudden frenzy of shocked gasps and furious whispers. Investors were already pulling out their smartphones, frantically dialing their private wealth managers and elite corporate attorneys to freeze their assets. A wealthy real estate tycoon dropped his crystal champagne glass, letting it shatter loudly against the polished marble floor as he glared at Julian with pure, unfiltered disgust. Julian looked around the luxurious ballroom like a terrified, trapped animal, the color entirely drained from his face. His carefully constructed empire of lies was burning to the ground, and there was absolutely no way to stop the blazing inferno. My father stood frozen, his hands shaking at his sides. He was slowly realizing that his prominent megachurch was irrevocably tied to this sinking ship. If Julian went down for massive corporate fraud and embezzlement, the entire Adams family would be dragged into the resulting federal investigation. They would lose everything they had spent decades building. The total destruction of their meticulously crafted fake legacy was happening right before their deeply horrified eyes. Then a sudden blur of violent motion caught the corner of my eye. My mother Beatrice lunged forward with her teeth bared in pure, unadulterated rage. Her hand swung fiercely through the cold air and she slapped me violently across the face to silence me. The sharp crack of flesh, striking flesh, echoed like a gunshot through the sudden suffocating silence of the grand ballroom. My head snapped violently to the right from the sheer force of the impact. A hot, stinging sensation instantly bloomed across my left cheek, radiating up toward the fresh surgical stitches hidden beneath my white medical bandage. For a fleeting second, the entire crowd froze. The wealthy investors, the elite socialites, and even the two massive security guards stood completely paralyzed by the sheer, unhinged brutality of a mother striking her injured daughter in public. I did not stumble. I did not raise my hand to cradle my burning cheek. I slowly turned my head back to face her, locking my eyes onto Beatrice. Her chest was heaving beneath her expensive silk gown. Her perfectly manicured hand was still trembling in the air from the sheer momentum of her vicious attack. "You vindictive, ungrateful little monster!" Beatrice spat, her voice vibrating with a toxic mixture of panic and absolute fury. "How dare you stand in this magnificent room and try to tear down a successful Black family's image? We have worked for decades to build the Addams family legacy. We clawed our way to the absolute top of Buckhead society. Julian is the best thing that ever happened to us. He opened doors for your sister that you could never even dream of knocking on. And you want to destroy all of that just because you are bitterly jealous." I stared at her, tasting the faint metallic tang of blood where my teeth had bitten into the inside of my cheek. "I am not destroying anything, Beatrice. Julian destroyed his own company the moment he decided to steal millions of dollars from these investors to pay off dangerous gambling syndicates. I am simply holding up a mirror to his crimes." "Crimes?" Beatrice scoffed loudly, waving her hand dismissively as if stealing investor capital was merely a minor accounting error. "Julian is a visionary developer. He simply experienced a temporary liquidity issue. It happens in high-level commercial real estate all the time. But you would not understand that because you possess absolutely no ambition. You have always been determined to drag this family down into the mud with you." She took another aggressive step toward me, jabbing her finger forcefully against my shoulder. "You are going to fix this right now, Sienna," she commanded, her tone slipping back into the tyrannical authority she had used to control my entire childhood. "You are a forensic accountant. You know exactly how to manipulate numbers and hide discrepancies. You are going to take those files, walk back to your miserable little cubicle, and you are going to scrub Julian's books completely clean. You will restructure his debt, hide the missing capital, and make this entire problem disappear immediately." I let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "You want me to commit federal financial fraud to save the man who drained your retirement accounts?" "I want you to do your duty to this family," Beatrice demanded fiercely. "You will clean up his mess just like you always cleaned up after your sister. Remember high school? When Serena failed her final exams because she was too busy partying, you did her homework. You wrote her essays. You made sure she graduated with honors so she could maintain her pageant queen image. This is absolutely no different. You are going to fix Julian's corporate ledgers for free, and you are going to get down on your knees and apologize to him for causing this public scene. And if I refuse," I challenged, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register, "if I decide to hand this bright red folder directly to the federal authorities tonight," Beatrice narrowed her eyes, her face twisting into a mask of pure malice. "If you do not fix his accounting records right this second, I will personally see to it that you are completely destroyed in Atlanta. Your father is the most powerful megachurch pastor in this state. Our congregation boasts over 10,000 loyal members, including local politicians and business leaders. I will stand at the pulpit this Sunday and publicly excommunicate you. I will tell the entire congregation that you are mentally unstable, deeply disturbed, and completely estranged from the grace of God. I will brand you a pathological liar. You will be a total pariah. No one in this city will ever hire you, speak to you, or associate with you again. You will be entirely invisible." Her threat hung heavily in the air. She genuinely believed that her social influence and pastoral authority still held power over me. She thought she could weaponize the church community to force my submission, just like she had done when I was a terrified teenager. She completely failed to realize that I no longer needed her approval, her community, or her conditional love. Before I could dismantle her pathetic threat, a loud, booming laugh erupted from behind her. Julian had recovered from his initial state of sheer panic. He stepped out from behind Serena, adjusting his tailored tuxedo jacket with a renewed sense of arrogant confidence. His blue eyes sparkled with malicious triumph. He looked around at the horrified investors who were still clutching their smartphones, and he offered them a wide, reassuring smile. "You really gave us a good scare there for a minute, Sienna." Julian chuckled, shaking his head as if he were dealing with a confused child. "You almost had me worried. But my mother-in-law is absolutely right. You are a low-level worker with zero understanding of high finance. You think a few missed payments and an offshore wire transfer can take down a titan like me." He walked directly up to me, his chest puffed out with undeniable arrogance. "I am completely untouchable," Julian boasted loudly, making sure his voice carried. "A massive shadow corporation just bought all my debt and saved my entire portfolio." Julian's booming laughter bounced off the crystal chandeliers, loud and incredibly grating. He looked around the ballroom, desperately seeking validation from the wealthy elite, who were now watching us with bated breath. He genuinely believed that this mysterious corporate bailout was his ultimate shield. He thought he had outsmarted the system, outsmarted his criminal creditors, and outsmarted me. I did not interrupt his pathetic victory lap. I let him bask in his own manufactured glory for a few seconds longer. The higher he placed himself on that pedestal, the harder the concrete floor was going to feel when he finally hit it. "You are absolutely right, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through his laughter like a freshly sharpened blade. "A massive, incredibly powerful shadow corporation did step in and purchase every single penny of your toxic debt. They bought your fraudulent loans, your outstanding vendor invoices, and the massive liabilities you desperately hid from the Municipal Banking Commission. The firm is called Vanguard Equity. I am sure you have heard of them." Julian scoffed, adjusting his bespoke tie with a smug, self-satisfied grin. "Of course I have heard of Vanguard Equity. They are a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm. They are notorious for aggressive takeovers and ruthless market acquisitions. They saw the underlying brilliance of my midtown luxury project and swooped in to capitalize on my visionary blueprint. They bought the debt because they know I am a commercial real estate genius. They want to be in business with me." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. The two security guards tensed, but I ignored them completely. I reached into the interior pocket of my white blazer for the second time tonight. My fingers bypassed the remaining financial documents in the red folder. Instead, I pulled out a single pristine matte black business card. It was heavy, minimalist, and deeply intimidating. The embossed gold lettering caught the light of the chandeliers above us. I held the black card between my index and middle fingers. I locked my eyes onto Julian's smug face, and then I casually dropped the card onto the polished surface of the nearest VIP cocktail table. The thick cardstock landed with a soft, definitive thud. "They did not buy your debt because they want to be in business with you, Julian," I stated, my voice echoing clearly across the silent ballroom. "They bought your debt because I told them to. Read the card." Julian glared at me, refusing to break eye contact. He thought it was a trick. Serena, however, could not contain her mounting anxiety. She pushed past her husband, her crimson silk gown rustling loudly. She snatched the black card off the table. Her eyes scanned the embossed gold text. I watched the exact second her brain processed the words. Her jaw dropped open. Her hands began to shake so violently that she nearly dropped the card onto the floor. "What does it say, Serena?" Julian snapped, his voice suddenly laced with genuine panic. "What kind of stupid forged garbage is she handing out now?" Serena could barely speak. She looked at me as if she were staring at a terrifying, unrecognizable ghost. "It says Vanguard Equity, Sienna Adams, sole founder and chief executive officer." A collective audible gasp rippled through the entire ballroom. The wealthy hedge fund managers, the elite property developers, and the influential politicians all stared at me in absolute shock. They knew the name Vanguard Equity. It was a titan in the financial sector, a powerhouse firm that dictated market trends and swallowed failing corporations whole. the realization that the bruised, bandaged woman, standing in the center of their exclusive charity gala, was the anonymous billionaire pulling the strings, sent a massive shockwave through the room. My father, Reverend Thomas, staggered backward. He bumped heavily into a cocktail table, sending a tray of expensive champagne glasses crashing to the floor. The shattering glass mirrored the total destruction of his narrow-minded worldview. My mother, Beatrice, clutched her pearl necklace, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The daughter she had just violently slapped, the daughter she had threatened to publicly excommunicate, was the billionaire owner of the very firm holding the keys to their entire existence. "That is impossible," Julian stammered, the color rapidly draining from his face. He snatched the black business card from Serena's trembling fingers. He stared at the gold lettering as if the words were written in a foreign language. "This is a fake. You had this printed at a cheap copy shop to try and scare me. You are a low-level forensic accountant. You do not have the capital to run a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm." "I was a forensic accountant 10 years ago, Julian," I corrected him smoothly. "I used those skills to track hidden corporate assets and expose financial fraud for major banking institutions. I took the incredibly modest bonuses I earned, invested them aggressively in emerging tech markets, and multiplied them. I built Vanguard equity from the ground up while you were busy spending your wife's family money on imported cars and country club memberships. I am the shadow investor. I am the anonymous billionaire. And I am the one who personally authorized the absolute acquisition of your pathetic, rotting real estate portfolio. You are absolutely nothing." He repeated, his voice cracking, as the terrifying reality of his situation began to shatter his fragile ego. He stepped toward me, his hands balled into tight fists, his entire body trembling with impotent rage. "You cannot be Vanguard. You cannot be the one holding my debt. It is a lie. Tell them it is a lie right now before I make you regret ever walking into this building. You are just trying to embarrass me in front of my elite partners. Admit that you are running a massive scam right now." I simply stared at his deeply desperate, crumbling facade with an icy smile. I waited. The silence in the room stretched to its absolute breaking point. Julian opened and closed his mouth repeatedly like a suffocating fish. He was desperately searching his highly polished vocabulary for a threat, a joke, or a lie that could magically save him. None came. I raised my left hand and snapped my fingers just once. It was a precise and deliberate echo of the exact arrogant gesture Julian had used to summon his own guards earlier tonight. Immediately, the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. 3 men in immaculate dark suits marched into the venue. They did not look like standard event bouncers or country club security. They moved with the terrifying, coordinated precision of a high-level corporate extraction team. The lead man, my personal head of security, carried a thick leather briefcase. He walked directly past Julian, completely ignoring the man's existence, and handed the briefcase to me. I placed it onto the cocktail table right next to my black business card. I clicked the brass locks open. The sharp metallic snaps sounded incredibly loud in the hushed room. I reached inside and pulled out a stack of legally binding notarized foreclosure documents. They were thick, heavily stamped, and completely irrefutable. I slapped the heavy stack of paper directly against Julian's chest. He flinched instinctively, bringing his hands up to catch the heavy file before it hit the floor. He stared down at the bold, terrifying black letters printed across the very top page. Notice of default and immediate foreclosure. "You see, Julian, the corporate world is incredibly small," I explained, projecting my voice so every single elite investor in the room could hear the absolute finality of his ruin. "When your highly leveraged, utterly fraudulent Midtown project started hemorrhaging cash, you became desperate. You went looking for private equity lenders who asked fewer questions than the municipal banks. You thought you found a discreet offshore entity willing to blindly fund your mess. You had absolutely no idea that you were signing your entire life over to a subsidiary completely controlled by Vanguard Equity. I bought your toxic debt exactly 3 months ago. I bought every single overdue invoice, every defaulting loan, and every desperate promissory note you issued." Serena let out a sharp, horrified gasp. She grabbed Julian's arm, shaking it violently as if trying to wake him from a nightmare. Julian, tell her she is lying. Tell her you still own the company. We have the Midtown project. We have the luxury cars. Tell her she is making this up right now. Julian could not speak. His eyes were frantically scanning the legal jargon on the first page, tracking the exact dates, the exact dollar amounts, and the undeniable signature at the bottom. His own signature. He had signed his own financial death warrant without ever realizing who was actually holding the pen. You missed your massive quarterly balloon payment yesterday at exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I stated coldly, delivering the killing blow. Your grace period expired precisely when you walked into this ballroom tonight to drink champagne and pretend you were a billionaire. You are not a billionaire, Julian. You do not even own the tuxedo you are wearing. According to the extreme default clauses you arrogantly signed without having your lawyers read the fine print, missing that payment triggered an immediate non-negotiable asset seizure. As of this exact second, Vanguard Equity officially owns your development firm. We own your commercial properties. We own the Midtown site. And we own every single empty bank account tied to your fraudulent name. The reaction from this crowd was instantaneous and utterly devastating. The powerful hedge fund managers Julian had spent the entire evening courting began physically backing away from him. It was as if he suddenly carried a highly contagious disease. The influential city council members turned their backs, furiously texting their aides to completely sever any political ties with the Vance family name. The elite property developers whispered to each other in absolute disgust. Julian was no longer a titan of Atlanta real estate. He was a radioactive, completely bankrupt fraud standing in the middle of his own ruined charity gala. Julian's knees buckled slightly. He dropped the heavy stack of foreclosure documents onto the marble floor, the papers scattered violently around his expensive designer shoes. He looked at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. "You cannot do this to me," he whispered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "I am Julian Vance. My family built this city. You are just a vindictive crazy woman trying to steal my hard-earned empire." "You never had an empire," I corrected him sharply, my voice devoid of any pity. "You had a mountain of stolen money and a monumental ego. I did not steal anything from you. I simply collected the debt you willingly signed over to me. You are utterly and completely bankrupt. You have absolutely nothing left." Serena let out a piercing, hysterical scream. She dropped to her knees right there in her crimson silk gown, frantically gathering the scattered legal papers as if holding them tightly could magically reverse the bankruptcy. She looked up at Julian, her mascara running down her face in thick black streaks. He did not look back at her. He just stared at the floor, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his absolute failure. The satisfying sound of Julian's complete destruction was suddenly interrupted. Heavy, frantic footsteps echoed behind me. Reverend Thomas pushed his way past the retreating investors. My father stepped into the empty circle that the crowd had formed around our shattered family. His pastoral composure was completely gone. His face was slick with terrified sweat. He looked at the scattered foreclosure documents, then at Julian's pale, defeated face, and finally locked his desperate, wide eyes onto me. He realized that his wealthy golden ticket son-in-law was gone, and the daughter he had just forcefully grabbed and tried to throw out was the most powerful person in the room. "Sienna, my beautiful, brilliant daughter," Thomas began, his voice shaking as he attempted to contort his furious scowl into a mask of loving paternal desperation. He held his hands up in a gesture of peaceful surrender. "Please let us all just take a deep breath. You have made your point. You have proven how incredibly successful and powerful you are. We are all so incredibly proud of you, but you must stop this madness right now. We are blood." My father stretched his hands out toward me, adopting the exact same magnanimous, forgiving posture he used every Sunday to extract heavy tithes from his desperate congregation. He lowered his voice to a soothing, deeply practiced baritone, trying to cast a spell of familial guilt over the smoking ruins of Julian's career. "Sienna, the Lord commands us to forgive those who trespass against us. You have been blessed with incredible, unimaginable wealth. God gave you this massive financial bounty so you could be the ultimate savior of the Addams family. Do not let wrath harden your heart tonight. We are your flesh and blood. You cannot destroy your own sister's husband out of petty spite. You have proven your point. I looked at the man who had forcefully grabbed my injured arm just 20 minutes ago. I looked at the holy hypocrite who had gladly stolen my college tuition to fund a lavish wedding for the very fraudster currently whimpering on the marble floor. Do not dare quote scripture to me, Thomas. I warned, my voice slicing through his pathetic pastoral performance. You do not care about grace, and you certainly do not care about my soul. You only care about the heavy collection plate and your pristine country club reputation. You are not begging for Julian's salvation right now. You are begging for your own. Thomas took another aggressive step forward, his polished facade cracking as he realized his usual religious manipulation was utterly useless against me. You are acting like a vicious tyrant, he hissed, dropping the holy act entirely. Julian made a few terrible, highly regrettable business mistakes. He got in too deep with the wrong offshore lenders, but he is still a Vance. He still has the pedigree and the elite connections to rebuild. You own the debt now. You have the ultimate power to restructure his loans, clear his corporate ledgers, and give him the capital to finish the Midtown project. You can fix this entire situation right now. If you foreclose on his firm, you are actively choosing to leave your sister completely destitute on the street. I am not leaving Serena destitute, I corrected him sharply. My eyes locked on his sweating face. Julian already did that when he lost $22 million at the baccarat tables in Macau. But you know what is truly fascinating about high-level corporate finance, Thomas? It is the underlying collateral. When Julian burned through all of his investor capital, he became desperate. The international criminal syndicates wanted their money immediately. No legitimate bank in the United States was going to loan $50 million to a sinking ship with zero liquidity. So Julian needed a co-signer. He needed a massive, rock-solid asset to guarantee the shadow loan from Vanguard Equity. Julian let out a pathetic, strangled gasp from the floor. He squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head frantically, as if he could physically block out the damning words I was about to speak. My mother Beatrice frowned in deep confusion. She looked from me to Thomas, completely oblivious to the catastrophic financial treason that had occurred right under her nose. What collateral? Beatrice demanded, her voice trembling with a sudden creeping terror. Julian's development firm owns half of Midtown. He has dozens of commercial properties. What are you talking about? I locked my eyes entirely on my father. The sweat on his forehead was now pouring down his face in thick, heavy drops, ruining his crisp designer collar. Tell her, Thomas, I commanded, my tone leaving absolutely no room for escape. Tell your devoted wife exactly what you secretly pledged to the Vanguard Equity Shadow Corporation 3 months ago to save your golden son-in-law from having his legs broken by violent loan sharks. Thomas could not speak. His jaw trembled violently, and he looked away, utterly unable to meet his wife's terrified gaze. Since the pastor has suddenly lost his voice, I will deliver the sermon, I announced, projecting my words so the remaining elite crowd could witness the complete dismantling of the holy hypocrite. Julian did not use his commercial properties as collateral because they were already leveraged to the absolute maximum. He needed a clean, unencumbered asset. So my father stepped in to save the day. Thomas illegally forged the signatures of the megachurch board of directors. He bypassed the entire pastoral committee and secretly pledged the actual physical deed to the Adams megachurch as the primary collateral for Julian's bailout loan. A collective gasp of sheer horror ripped through the remaining guests. Several prominent members of our church congregation who had paid thousands of dollars to attend this charity gala stared at their pastor with absolute revulsion. But I was not finished dismantling their fraudulent lives. I turned to my mother, who was now clutching her chest as if she were experiencing a massive heart attack. And because the church deed was not quite enough to cover the massive gambling deficits, Thomas needed a secondary asset to finalize the massive shadow loan. I continued relentlessly. He forged your signature too, Beatrice. He signed away the deed to your sprawling, luxurious Buckhead mansion. You do not own a single brick of that house anymore. It legally belongs to Vanguard Equity. No! Beatrice shrieked, a raw, primal sound of pure devastation that shattered the elegant atmosphere of the club. She grabbed Thomas by the lapels of his custom suit, shaking him violently. Tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not give my house to this arrogant white man. We worked our entire lives for that estate. I had to do it. Thomas blubbered, finally breaking down into pathetic, cowardly tears as he tried to pull away from his frantic wife. Julian promised he would pay it back. He said the Midtown project was going to double our money in 6 months. I was trying to protect the family legacy. If Julian went bankrupt, we would have been the laughingstock of Atlanta. I had to protect our elite status. You protected absolutely nothing, I stated with glacial finality. You committed massive, undeniable federal fraud to fund a gambler's luxury lifestyle. By defaulting on the payment yesterday, Julian did not just forfeit his development firm. He forfeited your entire church and your perfect suburban mansion. I own all of it. Every single crystal chandelier, every wooden pew, and every inch of perfectly manicured lawn. Serena, who had been kneeling on the marble floor, gathering the scattered foreclosure documents, finally read the specific addendums listing the seized assets. She realized that she had no trust fund, no luxury cars, and no family wealth left to fall back on. The realization hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. Her entire identity had been wiped out by the husband she worshipped blindly. The golden child was completely broke, homeless, and entirely exposed. The red silk of her designer gown suddenly looked like a tragic costume. She dropped the heavy papers, her hands flying up to grab her perfectly styled hair. She let out a guttural, earth-shattering scream of pure agony and lunged forward, dropping heavily onto her hands and knees as she began shrieking violently at her husband. Serena pounded her fists against the polished marble floor. Her screams were deafening, shattering whatever remained of the gala's sophisticated atmosphere. You promised me we were secure, she wailed, grabbing the lapels of Julian's tuxedo and shaking him with frantic strength. You told me the Midtown project was a gold mine. You told me we were going to buy the summer house in the Hamptons. You said my trust fund was generating record profits. How could you let her take everything? Do something, Julian. Fix this right now. Julian simply stared blankly ahead. He was completely unresponsive, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his financial destruction. He did not comfort her, of reassurance. He just stood there, a hollow shell of the arrogant man who had tried to throw me out. Serena finally realized her husband was entirely useless. She released his ruined jacket and slowly turned her tear-stained face toward me. The mask of the flawless golden child had completely melted away. Her mascara ran in thick black rivers down her cheeks. Her expensive silk gown was tangled around her knees. She crawled across the scattered foreclosure documents, abandoning all her pride as she reached out to grab the hem of my white trousers. "Sienna, please," Serena begged. Her voice was reduced to a pathetic, trembling whisper. "I know we have had our differences. I know I said some horrible things to you tonight. I was just stressed about the party. You know how I get when I'm under pressure. You have to understand that I had absolutely no idea Julian was doing any of this. I did not know about the gambling or the fake accounting. You cannot punish me for his mistakes. We are sisters." I looked down at her grasping hands. "You did not care that we were sisters when you watched Mom and Dad drain my college tuition to buy you a custom wedding dress," I replied coldly. "You did not care that we were sisters when you told everyone I was a socially unfit embarrassment. You only care about our bloodline now because your bank accounts are empty." "I will divorce him," Serena blurted out instantly. She pointed a shaking finger at Julian without even looking back at him. "I will file the papers tomorrow morning. I will leave him. Please do not take my things. Take his company. Take the properties. But leave my personal assets. Let me keep my trust fund. It has $5 million. That is my safety net. And please let me keep my cars. I need my Porsche and the Range Rover. You are a billionaire, Sienna. You do not need my cars. Let me walk away with what is mine." I let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. I stepped back, forcing her to release my trousers. "Your things?" I asked, my voice echoing in the silent ballroom. "Your trust fund. Serena, You really are completely clueless about the man you married. You spent the last 5 years planning lavish charity galas and posting pictures of your designer handbags on the internet. You never once looked at a single financial statement. If you had bothered to check, you would know the horrifying truth. What truth? She gasped, her eyes darting frantically between me and Julian. There is no trust fund, I stated with absolute brutal clarity. Your beloved visionary husband drained it 3 years ago. Serena froze. She slowly turned her head to look at Julian. What is she talking about, Julian? Tell her she is lying. Julian remained silent. He squeezed his eyes shut, unable to meet his wife's horrified gaze. He needed liquid capital to cover his initial losses in Macau, I explained to the entire room. He forged your signature on the withdrawal authorizations. He liquidated your stock portfolio, drained your high-yield savings accounts, and emptied your pristine trust fund down to the very last penny. You have been completely broke for 36 months, Serena. You were living purely on dangerous credit lines and fraudulent loans. You do not have $5 million. You have absolutely nothing. No, Serena shrieked, clutching her chest as if she had been physically shot. My money, that was my money. And regarding your luxury vehicles, I continued, unbothered by her dramatic breakdown. You do not own those either. Julian leased the Porsche and the Range Rover under his corporate entity to write them off as business expenses. Since Vanguard Equity just foreclosed on that corporate entity, those vehicles legally belong to my firm. In fact, I dispatched a specialized recovery team to your country club estate an hour ago. The tow trucks have already removed both vehicles from your driveway. They are sitting in a secure impound lot. You will be taking a taxi home tonight. That is if you can even afford the cab fare. Serena collapsed entirely onto the marble floor. She curled into a tight shaking ball, weeping with a profound, earth-shattering despair. Her entire identity was tied to her wealth, her status, and her pristine image. In the span of 20 minutes, I had systematically stripped every single piece of that illusion away. She was no longer the queen of Atlanta high society. She was just another broke, desperate casualty of her husband's monumental greed. Julian's head suddenly snapped up. The reality of his complete exposure finally shattered the last remaining shred of his sanity. He saw the investors looking at him with pure disgust. He heard his wife sobbing on the floor. He looked at me, standing tall, victorious, and completely untouched in my tailored white suit. The sheer humiliation boiled over into violent, uncontrollable rage. His large hands curled tightly into white-knuckled, shaking fists. All logic, basic reason, and corporate strategy vanished entirely from his mind. He abandoned any pretense of being a civilized elite businessman. He locked his furious, bloodshot eyes onto me and completely snapped. He suddenly charged straight forward, lunging violently across the polished marble floor directly at my exposed throat. Julian hurled his entire body weight forward, his hands stretched out like jagged claws aiming directly for my throat. He moved with the reckless, uncoordinated desperation of a cornered predator, completely abandoning his polished corporate facade. But I did not flinch. I did not even blink. Before his expensive leather shoes could cross the 3 feet of space separating us, my private security detail reacted with terrifying speed. The lead guard, a massive man built like a concrete wall, stepped smoothly into Julian's path. He grabbed Julian by the lapels of his custom tuxedo, twisted his torso with practiced efficiency, and slammed him face first into the unforgiving marble floor. The impact made a sickening hollow crack that echoed sharply over the smooth jazz still playing from the stage. Julian let out a breathless, agonizing wheeze as the air was forcefully expelled from his lungs. The second guard dropped down immediately, pinning Julian's arms painfully behind his back and securing them with a heavy zip tie. The entire physical altercation lasted less than 4 seconds. Julian, the self-proclaimed titan of Atlanta commercial real estate, was now completely immobilized, pressing his bleeding, bruised cheek against the cold stone floor while a security guard pressed a heavy combat boot firmly between his shoulder blades. Serena shrieked in absolute horror, scrambling backward on her hands and knees to get away from the violent scene. She did not try to help her husband. She shrank away from him, her crimson silk gown bunching up around her waist as she stared at the man who had just destroyed her entire life. The remaining elite guests at the charity gala did not gasp this time. They did not look away in polite high society discomfort. Instead, almost in perfect unison, dozens of wealthy hedge fund managers, city politicians, and property developers reached into their tailored pockets and pulled out their smartphones. The bright flashes of camera lights began popping rapidly across the dark ballroom. The distinct, relentless clicking of camera shutters filled the air. They were recording every single humiliating second of the absolute downfall of the Adams and Vance families. These were the exact same people my parents had spent 30 years desperately trying to impress. These were the elite white investors Julian had arrogantly boasted about just 20 minutes ago. Now they were eagerly filming his pathetic, violent breakdown to share in their exclusive group chats before the night was even over. The pristine, untouchable reputation my mother and father had sacrificed my college tuition to build was currently being broadcast live to the entire financial district. My father stood paralyzed near the shattered remains of the champagne glasses, his pastoral authority completely evaporating under the harsh glare of the camera flashes. He raised his trembling hands to cover his face, desperately trying to shield his identity from the wealthy congregation members who were actively recording his profound disgrace. Beatrice clutched her pearl necklace so tightly that the fragile string finally snapped. Dozens of expensive white pearls scattered across the marble floor, bouncing and rolling away, just like her carefully constructed illusions of grandeur. Neither of them moved to intervene. They simply stood there, entirely exposed as the greedy, fraudulent hypocrites they had always been. I looked down at Julian, who was now thrashing uselessly against the heavy weight of my security guard. He spit blood onto the pristine floor, his perfectly styled blonde hair matted to his forehead with nervous sweat. He glared up at me with pure, unadulterated venom, but the paralyzing fear in his eyes betrayed his tough exterior. He was finally realizing that he could not bully charm or buy his way out of this total destruction. I was pinned to the floor by the very woman he had just threatened to throw into the street. "You really thought you could physically attack me in a room full of your own investors?" I asked softly, my voice carrying easily over his pathetic groans. "You thought your white privilege and your stolen wealth would somehow protect you from basic consequences? You are not a visionary developer, Julian. You are just a violent, desperate criminal who finally ran out of other people's money to steal. And the best part is that you orchestrated your own public execution. You invited all these powerful people here tonight to celebrate your massive success. You paid for the open bar. You rented this extravagant ballroom. You essentially sold tickets to your own spectacular bankruptcy and guaranteed that every single elite business partner in Atlanta would be standing right here to watch you fall. I did not ruin your reputation tonight. I just provided the necessary lighting so everyone could finally see what you actually are." Julian thrashed his legs, trying to kick the guard, but a sharp twist of his bound wrists made him cry out in sharp pain. He stopped struggling immediately, his chest heaving as he gasped for air against the cold stone. Serena covered her ears, sobbing uncontrollably as the camera flashes continued to blind her. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading for mercy, begging me to call off the guards and stop the brutal public spectacle. But I offered her absolutely no comfort. I adjusted my tailored white blazer, remaining completely unbothered by the violent chaos unfolding directly at my feet. The sharp, persistent wail of sirens suddenly pierced the cool night air outside the country club. The high-pitched, frantic sound of approaching police cruisers and federal vehicles grew louder and louder with every passing second. The flashing red and blue lights began to reflect brightly against the tall, heavy glass windows of the grand ballroom, painting the terrified faces of my parents in stark, unforgiving colors. Julian's eyes widened in sheer absolute terror as the loud sirens confirmed that this was not just a financial foreclosure, but a full-scale criminal takedown. He finally realized that his darkest, inescapable nightmare was truly just beginning right exactly now. The glass doors of the Buckhead Club burst open with a crash. Cold night air swept into the ballroom, followed immediately by federal agents wearing dark jackets with the letters FBI printed in bold yellow. Atlanta police officers flanked them, their hands resting securely on their belts as they secured every exit. The elite investors scrambled out of the way. They pressed their backs tightly against the gold columns, desperate to avoid being associated with the massive federal raid unfolding in the middle of their exclusive charity gala. Julian lay frozen on the marble floor. The flashing red and blue lights from the squad cars parked outside strobed intensely through the tall windows, casting erratic shadows across his sweating face. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with horrific realization. He had assumed the sirens were simply local police responding to a noise complaint today. He never fathomed that federal authorities were coming directly for him. "Did you really think a simple financial foreclosure was the end of my plan?" I asked him, my voice steady and loud enough for the approaching agents to hear. I spent a decade working as a forensic accountant. My entire job was tracking down arrogant men who thought they could outsmart the federal government. When I bought your toxic debt 3 months ago, I acquired full access to your internal servers, your encrypted email accounts, and your hidden offshore routing numbers. You left a massive, undeniable trail of digital evidence. Julian squirmed under the weight of my security guard, but he could not break free. His chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths. "I took every single falsified loan application you submitted to the banking commission." I continued. "I packaged them together with the wire transfer receipts from the illegal gambling syndicates in Macau. I added the forged signatures you used to drain Serena's trust fund, and I compiled a massive dossier of your extensive wire fraud, money laundering, and corporate embezzlement." Then I handed that pristine red folder directly to the Department of Justice. "They have been quietly building a federal indictment against you. They were just waiting for you to gather your co-conspirators into one convenient room tonight for an arrest." The lead FBI agent, a tall woman with a severe expression and a silver badge, marched straight to the center of the ballroom. She gave a brief nod of acknowledgement and signaled her team. "Step back, please," the lead agent commanded my private security detail. My head of security instantly released Julian's arms and stepped back. Julian gasped for air, trying to push himself up, but two federal agents grabbed his shoulders and hauled him forcefully to his feet. They spun him around, slamming his chest against one of the grand stone pillars. The sharp click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around his wrists echoed through the silent room. "Julian Vance, you are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, international money laundering, and corporate embezzlement," the lead agent recited firmly, reading him his rights as her partners searched his tailored tuxedo pockets. "You have the right to remain silent." Julian looked absolutely deranged. His styled blonde hair was ruined, his expensive suit was wrinkled and stained with drops of his own blood. He looked wildly around the ballroom, making frantic eye contact with the elite politicians and property developers he had been schmoozing just an hour ago. Every single one of them looked away in pure disgust. They were already calculating how to legally erase his name from their portfolios, having failed to garner any sympathy from his business partners. Julian desperately whipped his head around to search for his wife. Serena was still kneeling on the floor, clutching her ruined crimson silk gown. "Serena!" Julian screamed, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "Serena, you have to help me. Call my lawyers right now. Tell them this is a massive misunderstanding. Call my father and tell him to wire the bail money. Do not just sit there, do something to help your husband." Serena slowly looked up at the man she had worshipped for years. She looked at the heavy steel handcuffs binding his wrists. She looked at the federal agents securing his arms. Then she looked at the scattered foreclosure documents that explicitly detailed how he had systematically drained her entire trust fund to pay off violent criminals. The illusion of her perfect, wealthy, white savior husband shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She did not reach out to comfort him. She did not grab her phone to call his expensive lawyers. Instead, Serena pushed herself backward, sliding her body across the marble floor to put as much physical distance between them as possible. She looked at Julian with an expression of pure horror and profound revulsion. She was staring at a monster who had completely destroyed her luxurious life. She slowly shook her head, refusing to speak a single word to him. "You cannot leave me like this!" Julian shrieked, fighting against the federal agents as they began to forcefully march him toward the grand exit doors. "I elevated this family. You owe me. I gave you everything. His desperate screams faded into the cool night air as the agents dragged him out of the Buckhead Club and shoved him into the back of a waiting federal transport vehicle. The doors slammed shut, cutting off his frantic whining forever. Julian Vance was gone, destined to spend the next 15 years in a federal penitentiary. I stood perfectly still, letting the satisfying silence wash over the stunned crowd. I had dismantled the arrogant man who belittled my existence. But the night was not over. A heavy thud drew my attention right. My mother Beatrice had finally reached her breaking point. The crushing weight of losing her mansion and elite status completely shattered her fragile ego. She collapsed to the floor, begging me to stop the absolute madness right now, clutching my tailored trousers in desperation. I stared down at the trembling woman kneeling on the cold floor. Beatrice gripped the crisp fabric of my white trousers with both hands. The heavy diamond rings dug sharply into my leg. She looked up at me with terrified eyes. The haughty matriarch who slapped my face 30 minutes ago was gone. In her place was a broken stranger pleading for her lifestyle. She did not care about the severe physical pain I was in. She ignored the surgical stitches aching beneath my bandage. She only cared about her sprawling Buckhead estate and social standing. "Please, Sienna, you have to listen to me," Beatrice sobbed. Her voice was a pathetic whine that echoed across the silent ballroom. "You cannot take my home. I decorated every single room in that house. I hosted charity dinners in that garden for 20 years. It is my entire life. We are your family. You are my daughter. You cannot throw your own mother out into the street." I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I felt absolutely nothing. I reached down and firmly grasped her wrists. I pried her shaking fingers off my tailored suit. I stepped back, creating a deliberate physical distance between us. "Do not dare call yourself my mother," I said, my voice projecting with chilling clarity. "A mother protects her children. A mother shows up when her child is bleeding out in an emergency room. You are just a greedy opportunist who happened to give birth to me." Reverend Thomas rushed forward, his pastoral composure completely shattered. He dropped heavily to his knees right beside his weeping wife. The great religious leader of Atlanta was now groveling on the floor of a country club, stripped of all his fake righteousness. He clasped his hands in a desperate posture of prayer. "Sienna, I am begging you before God," Thomas pleaded. His voice cracked with genuine terror. "Take the megachurch. Take Julian's fraudulent company. Take the commercial real estate. But please leave us the house. We have nowhere else to go. The congregation will abandon us the moment they find out I pledged the church deed as collateral. We will be totally ruined. Show us a fraction of the mercy we failed to show you." I looked down at the two pathetic figures cowering helplessly at my feet right now. The absolute irony of their current situation was incredibly satisfying. They had spent my entire life making me feel small, invisible, and completely unworthy of their attention. Now they were kneeling desperately before me, pathetically begging for the very scraps of immense wealth they had tried to violently steal from my future. "Mercy is a privilege reserved for those who possess a conscience," I stated coldly. "You two sacrificed my college tuition to buy Serena a designer wedding gown. You allowed Julian to openly mock my career while he secretly drained your retirement accounts. You worshipped his white privilege and his fake wealth, and you offered up your own daughter as a lamb on the altar of his towering ego." I turned my attention directly to Beatrice. She was gasping for air, her chest heaving with dramatic sobs. "Your massive Buckhead mansion officially became the legal property of Vanguard Equity at exactly 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon," I announced. "I own the title. I own the land. I am issuing your formal eviction notice right here and right now. You have 48 hours to pack and vacate the premises entirely." Beatrice let out a horrific, blood-curdling shriek. "48 hours? That is completely impossible. We have a 20,000 square foot estate. We have decades of antique furniture and expensive art. We cannot possibly pack our entire lives into boxes in 2 days." "You will only pack your clothes, cheap jewelry, and personal hygiene items," I corrected her sharply. According to the exact default clauses Thomas signed, all furniture, artwork, and physical assets inside the house were included directly in the collateral agreement. "You do not own the antique dining table. You do not own the crystal chandeliers. You will leave that house with nothing but the clothes on your backs and the suitcases you can carry." Thomas buried his face in his hands, weeping loudly into his palms. The realization of their absolute poverty finally crushed his spirit. If you are not completely off my property by midnight on Thursday, my private security team will physically remove you. I warned them. I will change the locks. I will activate the alarms. I will have the local police arrest you for trespassing. Do not test my resolve. I am utterly finished playing games with this toxic family. I looked at the two of them one final time. I wanted to burn this exact image into my memory forever. You made your ultimate choice the night of my horrific car accident. I said, my voice immediately dropping to a harsh register. You told the trauma surgeon you were too busy with Serena's hair crisis. You left me to die on a cold operating table. You severed the chains of guilt that held me down. I officially disown you both. The dutiful daughter you left to die in that hospital is gone. Do not ever speak my name again. I turned my back on my shattered family. I did not look at the investors recording the scene on their smartphones. I did not look at the federal agents securing the perimeter. I simply walked straight forward. The remaining crowd of wealthy socialites parted immediately, creating a clear path for me to exit the ballroom. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the Buckhead Club and stepped out into the cool, refreshing night air. As I walked down the marble steps toward my waiting Maybach, my personal cell phone suddenly vibrated inside my pocket. I pulled it out. The caller ID did not display a name. It was a completely unknown number silently broadcasting from a highly encrypted international line. I pressed the green button and lifted the glowing screen to my ear while standing on the cool pavement outside the Buckhead Club. The crisp autumn breeze whipped my hair around my face as a familiar, steady voice greeted me. It was Elias, my chief operating officer, and the only person who knew the entire scope of my financial empire. He did not waste time with pleasantries. I immediately confirmed that the local authorities had successfully transported Julian to the federal detention center downtown. The asset seizure protocols were fully active, and my private security teams had already secured the perimeters of both the megachurch and the sprawling suburban mansion. I thanked Elias, ended the call, and slid into the back of my waiting Maybach. The heavy leather door closed, shutting out the chaotic wail of the police sirens fading into the distance. For the first time in 34 years, I leaned my head against the headrest and felt an absolute, unshakable sense of profound peace. The next morning, sunlight poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse office in the heart of Midtown Atlanta. The panoramic view of the bustling city skyline was a daily reminder of exactly what I had built from absolutely nothing. My desk was a sleek slab of polished black marble, completely devoid of clutter. I stood near the glass, sipping a cup of dark roast coffee, watching the morning traffic crawl far below. My surgical wound throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, but it was easily ignored. The heavy, suffocating weight of my family's toxic expectations had been completely lifted from my shoulders. The heavy mahogany doors of my office swung open right on schedule. Elias walked in carrying two thick leather-bound portfolios. He was a brilliant corporate strategist with a razor-sharp legal mind. He dropped the first portfolio directly onto the center of my desk and took a seat in one of the modern leather chairs opposite me. He looked incredibly satisfied. "The execution was absolutely flawless, Sienna," Elias announced, opening the folder to reveal a stack of stamped court documents and banking confirmations. "Vanguard Equity now has undisputed legal possession of Julian's entire commercial real estate portfolio. We froze his remaining operational accounts at exactly midnight. The federal magistrate reviewed the offshore wire fraud evidence you compiled and completely agreed with our assessment. Julian was officially denied bail early this morning. The judge deemed him an extreme flight risk due to his deep ties with international gambling syndicates and his hidden accounts in Macau. He is going to be sitting in a federal holding cell for a very long time." I walked over to my desk and sat down, carefully reviewing the documents. "What is the current situation with the church and the residential property?" I asked, flipping through the asset transfer confirmations. "The megachurch board of directors held an emergency closed-door meeting at 3 o'clock this morning," Elias replied, handing me a printed press release. "They were absolutely terrified of being implicated in the federal wire fraud investigation." When they saw the undeniable proof that Thomas had secretly forged their signatures to pledge the church deed as collateral for a private luxury development loan, they immediately turned on him. They officially ousted your father from his pastoral position before the sun even came up. He is permanently banned from the premises, and they are fully cooperating with our asset transition team. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing the monumental shift in power. My father had spent decades cultivating a pristine, untouchable image of holy authority. He had used that massive platform to gaslight me, belittle my career, and drain my college tuition. In less than 12 hours, his entire kingdom had crumbled into dust. He had lost his mansion, his prestigious job, and his fake reputation. My mother Beatrice was currently waking up in a house she no longer owned, staring at empty bank accounts she could no longer use to buy her superficial friends. Serena was likely sitting in a cheap hotel room, finally realizing that her golden child status offered zero protection against extreme poverty. The forensic trap I had meticulously designed and implemented had worked with devastating absolute perfection. Every single domino fell exactly where I had calculated it would. We have effectively neutralized all of their financial capabilities, I stated, closing the first portfolio and pushing it aside. They have zero liquid capital, and their credit lines are entirely frozen. Ensure that the eviction team arrives at the Buckhead mansion precisely at the 48-hour mark. I do not want them given a single extra minute to linger on my property. They need to understand that my deadlines are not suggestions. The security team is already briefed and standing by, Elias confirmed, nodding sharply. He then reached for the second, slightly thinner portfolio. His confident expression shifted into something much more serious and cautious. He slid the folder across the smooth marble desk toward me. However, we do have a new development. It seems your father is not going to surrender his public image without throwing a massive, desperate tantrum first. He found a way to secure external legal representation. I narrowed my eyes and opened the second folder. How is that possible? I personally ensured that every single one of his accounts was locked down. He does not have the retainer fee for a junior paralegal, let alone a corporate defense attorney. He does not need a retainer fee when the lawyer is willing to work on contingency just for the media exposure, Elias explained, pointing to the name printed on the legal notice. Thomas hired Marcus Sterling. He is a sleazy, high-profile defense attorney, notorious for taking on sensationalized cases and turning them into massive media spectacles. Sterling thrives on manipulating public opinion and dragging his opponents through the mud. I stared at the official legal injunction request filed by Marcus Sterling. I smiled coldly. Marcus Sterling is a predictable bottom feeder who relies on public sympathy, I stated, tossing the injunction request onto my desk. What exactly is his angle for this ridiculous lawsuit? Elias checked his tablet. Sterling claims predatory lending and manipulation. Their affidavit states you intentionally concealed your true identity behind the Vanguard Equity corporate veil. They are arguing you weaponized insider knowledge of family dynamics to trap them into a predatory loan agreement, wanting the judge to completely invalidate the foreclosure. I laughed. They committed massive federal wire fraud to fund a degenerate gambler, and they are trying to paint themselves as innocent victims. That is absolute delusion. It gets worse, Elias warned. Sterling launched a highly coordinated media smear campaign. Your parents appeared on 3 local morning shows today. They are actively painting you as a rogue, deeply ungrateful daughter who orchestrated a malicious scheme to steal generational wealth from a prominent black family. I watched a news clip on his tablet. Beatrice was sitting on a plush studio couch next to Thomas, wearing a modest conservative dress, ditching her flashy designer labels. She clutched a crumpled tissue, forcing thick fake tears down her face. We gave Sienna everything, Beatrice sobbed to the television host, her voice trembling with manufactured heartbreak. We raised her in the church, but she became obsessed with money and revenge. She used a shadow corporation to trick her own father into a loan he did not understand. She threw us onto the street without a penny. Thomas put a comforting arm around his weeping wife, looking into the news camera. We are praying for her soul. Sienna lost her way. She is using billions to crush the very church that built this community. We ask the public to stand with us. I locked the tablet screen and handed it back to Elias. I did not feel a single ounce of anger or betrayal. I only felt a cold, hyper-focused sense of absolute determination. They were trying to manipulate the court of public opinion because they knew they had absolutely no solid legal ground to stand on. They wanted me to panic issue a public statement and ultimately offer a quiet financial settlement to make the bad press disappear. They severely underestimated my tolerance for total warfare. Let them cry on television, I ordered smoothly, standing up and walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window. Let them dig their public graves as deep as they possibly can. I want you to instruct our corporate legal team to prepare a lethal, overwhelming countermotion. We are not going to settle. We are going to completely obliterate their lawsuit with extreme prejudice. Gather every single piece of communication between Julian and Thomas. Pull the exact timestamps of the fraudulent signatures. We will bury Marcus Sterling in so much undeniable paper evidence that the judge will sanction him for filing a frivolous lawsuit. Elias nodded rapidly, typing my exact instructions into his secure tablet. Sterling filed for an emergency injunction hearing set for this coming Thursday. He is hoping to ambush us and secure a temporary halt on the asset seizure before we have time to fully organize our defense. He plans to put Thomas on the stand to testify about his complete ignorance regarding Julian's illegal gambling debts. Thomas is going to perjure himself under oath, I noted, turning back to face my chief operating officer. He is going to swear on a Bible in a federal courtroom that he had no idea Julian was running a massive Ponzi scheme. We need a definitive kill shot. I want to review the original unredacted corporate contracts Thomas signed when he pledged the megachurch as collateral. Bring me the physical files from the secure vault. Elias left the office and returned 5 minutes later carrying a heavy fireproof lockbox. He placed it on my desk and entered the security code. I pulled out the thick stack of original legal contracts. These were the exact documents my father had blindly signed in his desperate, frantic attempt to save his arrogant white son-in-law. I sat down and began reading through the dense legal jargon, scanning every single paragraph, addendum, and subclause with the meticulous, trained eye of a forensic accountant. I read for 2 hours in absolute silence. Elias sat quietly across from me, reviewing the incoming defense motions. My eyes tracked down the very last page of the primary collateral agreement. I stopped reading. I slowly traced my index finger over a specific, heavily buried paragraph buried deep within the third addendum. It was a standard corporate compliance clause, but the specific wording regarding the pastoral board of directors caught my immediate attention. I slowly read the entire paragraph 3 separate times to ensure I was interpreting the complex legal language perfectly correctly. A slow, triumphant smile spread across my face. I had found it. I had found the exact, undeniable trapdoor that would permanently seal my parents' fate in a court of law. Elias, I said, my voice dropping to a low, incredibly sharp register. Look at Section 4, Paragraph B of the Secondary Collateral Agreement. Elias leaned over the desk, reading the highlighted section carefully. His eyes widened as the legal implication registered in his mind. Thomas did not just forge the signatures of the church board, I explained, tapping the paper firmly. According to this specific legally binding covenant, any unauthorized pledging of the church deed automatically triggers a full, unmitigated audit of all pastoral discretionary funds spanning the last 10 years. Elias looked up at me, a dangerous smile mirroring my own. If we execute this clause during the hearing, we gain full, unrestricted legal access to his private pastoral bank accounts. Exactly. I confirmed, closing the file with a loud, incredibly satisfying snap. This completely hidden clause just gave me the absolute legal authority to expose every single stolen dime he embezzled. He will simply not survive this brutal legal destruction. Thursday morning arrived with the suffocating humidity typical of an Atlanta autumn. The federal courthouse building downtown was an imposing structure of cold marble and polished mahogany. I walked through the heavy double doors wearing a tailored charcoal suit, flanked by Elias and my lead corporate litigator, David Vance. The courtroom was packed to absolute capacity. Marcus Sterling had clearly alerted the local press, filling the wooden gallery benches with eager reporters and whispering members of my father's former megachurch congregation. Beatrice sat in the front row, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. Thomas sat at the plaintiff's table wearing an oversized, slightly wrinkled suit to emphasize his newly manufactured poverty. Judge Harrison, a notoriously strict federal magistrate with zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics, slammed his heavy wooden gavel down to call the emergency injunction hearing to order. Marcus Sterling immediately leaped to his feet, adjusting his flashy silk tie. He paced back and forth in front of the judge's bench, launching into a highly rehearsed, deeply theatrical opening statement. Sterling painted a vivid, completely fabricated picture of me as a ruthless, money-obsessed predator. He told the court that I had weaponized my advanced financial knowledge to intentionally deceive my own flesh and blood. According to his dramatic narrative, I had hidden behind the massive corporate veil of Vanguard equity to orchestrate a malicious, deeply personal vendetta against a loving, generous Christian family. Sterling pointed a dramatic finger directly at me, claiming I had explicitly manipulated the complex loan documents to guarantee my father would default. He begged Judge Harrison to grant the emergency injunction, arguing that the foreclosure on the megachurch and the family mansion was the result of severe elder abuse and blatant corporate fraud. Judge Harrison remained completely impassive. He ordered Sterling to call his first witness. Thomas slowly stood up, placing a trembling hand on the wooden table for support as he shuffled toward the witness box. He raised his right hand, placed his left hand flat on the provided Bible, and swore to tell the whole truth. Once seated, Thomas looked out at the gallery, making sure his former congregation members could see his fabricated anguish. Sterling approached the podium, asking his client to explain the exact circumstances surrounding the Vanguard Equity Loan Agreement. Thomas leaned toward the microphone, his voice shaking with practiced pastoral sorrow. "I was completely deceived by my own daughter," Thomas stated, wiping a fake tear from his cheek. "Julian came to me asking for a simple character reference for a standard business loan. Sienna knew we were trying to help him. She sent a courier to my church office with a stack of highly complicated corporate paperwork. I trusted her implicitly because she is my child. She assured me over the phone that I was only signing a basic guarantor agreement. I never saw any addendums about collateral. I never read a single line about pledging the church deed or my residential home. I had absolutely no idea Julian was using the house of God as a financial pawn. If I had known she was tricking me into risking our sacred sanctuary, I would have never picked up that pen. She hid the true nature of the contract from me completely." I sat perfectly still at the defense table. I did not shake my head. I did not scoff at his blatant lies. I simply wrote a single note on my legal pad and slid it over to David. Thomas was committing massive, undeniable federal perjury in open court. He was explicitly lying to a federal judge about his knowledge of the collateral. He was doubling down on his own destruction. Sterling thanked his client and confidently walked back to his seat, looking incredibly smug. He genuinely thought he had secured the sympathy of the court. Judge Harrison turned his stern gaze toward our table and asked if the defense wished to cross-examine the witness or call their own. David stood up, buttoning his jacket, and politely informed the court that the defense declined to cross-examine Reverend Thomas. Instead, we requested permission to call our primary witness to the stand. Judge Harrison granted the request. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my charcoal suit, and walked confidently across the silent courtroom. I climbed the short wooden steps into the witness box. I placed my hand firmly on the Bible, swore the oath, and sat down. I looked directly at my father, who was now sitting next to Sterling. The smug confidence on Thomas's face began to crack ever so slightly under my unwavering, icy stare. David approached the podium, but he did not hold a stack of papers. He did not prepare a long, winding line of questioning. We had planned this exact maneuver down to the very last second. We knew Thomas would lie, and we were fully prepared to detonate the explosive charge right under his feet. "Miss Adams, your father just testified under oath that he had absolutely no prior knowledge regarding the specific collateral requirements of the Vanguard Equity Loan," David said, his voice ringing loud and clear across the packed room. "He claims you intentionally deceived him about pledging the megachurch and his personal residence. How do you respond to those incredibly serious allegations today before this judge?" I leaned forward slowly, bringing my mouth very close to the microphone. I stared directly at Marcus Sterling, watching his arrogant smile completely vanish. The entire wooden gallery held its collective breath in deep suspense. My father is blatantly lying to this federal court today, I stated firmly, pulling a small, sleek silver flash drive from my tailored blazer pocket and holding it up high enough for the judge to clearly see the device. He approached me knowing exactly what he was doing. I brought the exact undeniable audio recording from 3 months ago that easily proves he fully orchestrated the entire fraudulent scheme himself. He planned every single illegal detail perfectly. Marcus Sterling jumped up from his leather chair. "Objection!" he shouted. "The defense cannot ambush this court with unverified audio files. This violates discovery protocol. We demand this flash drive be stricken from the record." "Your Honor, this is direct rebuttal evidence," David Vance stated. Reverend Thomas testified under penalty of perjury that he had zero knowledge of the collateral terms. This recording proves he actively orchestrated the entire illegal transaction. We ask the court to admit this vital evidence. Judge Harrison glared at Sterling. "Overruled. Your client decided to swear on a Bible and tell a detailed story to this federal court today. If the defense holds proof that your client committed perjury on my watch, I am going to hear it. Bailiff, connect the device to the audio system. Proceed, Miss Adams." A suffocating silence fell over the packed gallery. Beatrice clutched her purse, eyes darting nervously. Thomas sank lower into his wooden chair. The court bailiff took the silver flash drive from my hand, plugged it into the terminal, and pressed play. A digital beep echoed through the surround sound speakers. Then a shrill voice filled the federal courtroom. It was the voicemail my mother left on my phone the exact night I was bleeding out in the trauma ward. "Thomas, you have to sign those Vanguard papers tonight." Beatrice's recorded voice snapped angrily. "I do not care if the church board has not approved the transfer. Just forge the pastoral signatures like we discussed. Julian needs that shadow loan approved before the banking commission investigates his empty accounts. If we do not secretly pledge the megachurch and our Buckhead mansion right now, the authorities will realize he lost all the investor capital in Macau. Our legacy will be ruined." The recording paused briefly as a clinking champagne glass was heard. Then my mother's callous voice continued. "And ignore the hospital calling about Sienna," Beatrice ordered on the tape, her tone dripping with annoyance. "The trauma surgeon said she was in a severe car crash and might not survive the night. I told them we are too busy to visit. Julian's launch party is tonight and Serena needs us. Sienna can handle her own medical emergencies. Just focus on forging the church deeds so we can protect Julian's image. We will deal with Sienna tomorrow if she is still alive." The audio file clicked and ended. The dead silence that followed was incredibly profound. The entire courtroom sat paralyzed in absolute shock. The reporters stopped typing. The former megachurch congregation members stared at Beatrice and Thomas with unfiltered disgust. A woman covered her mouth and gasped loudly, horrified by the sheer depravity of a mother leaving her daughter to die just to cover up a massive real estate scam. Marcus Sterling sank into his chair in defeat. Thomas buried his face in his hands, trembling uncontrollably as the reality of the recording shattered his facade. Beatrice let out a pathetic whine, desperately trying to hide behind her hands as the burning glares of the public pierced through her. Judge Harrison leaned forward, gripping his wooden gavel with white-knuckled intensity. His face was a mask of terrifying judicial fury. He stared directly at my father. "Reverend Thomas," Judge Harrison growled, his voice trembling with suppressed rage, "I have presided over this federal court for 22 years. I have seen corporate thieves, violent criminals, and ruthless cartel leaders. But I have rarely witnessed the level of sickening, morally bankrupt hypocrisy that you and your wife have displayed in my courtroom today. You stood before me, swore an oath to God, and blatantly lied today. You attempted to use the justice system to steal back the assets you willingly forfeited to cover up financial crimes." He raised his heavy wooden gavel high into the air. "I am dismissing this frivolous injunction request with extreme prejudice," Judge Harrison declared loudly. "The foreclosure executed by Vanguard Equity is fully upheld and deemed completely legal." Furthermore, due to the egregious nature of this malicious lawsuit and your undeniable perjury, I am ordering the plaintiffs Thomas and Beatrice Adams to pay 100% of the defendant's corporate legal fees. The gavel slammed down. The sharp crack sounded like a gunshot. It was the definitive sound of their total ruin. This civil hearing is officially adjourned, Judge Harrison added. But your legal troubles are just beginning. I am immediately forwarding this verified audio recording, along with the transcript of your perjured testimony today, directly to the United States Attorney's Office. They will be pursuing federal fraud charges against both of you before the end of the week. Bailiff, clear this courtroom immediately. The gallery erupted into chaos as reporters sprinted toward the doors. Thomas and Beatrice remained frozen. They had lost their sprawling mansion. They had lost their prestigious megachurch. They had lost their fake reputation. Now they were saddled with millions in legal fees they could not possibly pay. I stood up from the witness box, smoothing my tailored jacket. I walked slowly over to the plaintiff's table and looked down at the two pathetic strangers who used to be my parents. You have 48 hours to vacate the property just like I promised, I reminded them coldly. But I suggest you skip packing your expensive designer clothes. You will not need them where you are going. Thomas looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. What do you mean, Sienna? We are already completely destitute. We have no money left. What else could you possibly take from us? I smiled, a sharp and terrifying expression of pure victory. I did not just trigger the pastoral audit clause, Thomas. I forwarded the complete financial findings to the federal government. Take a look outside those heavy double doors. A team of incredibly aggressive agents from the Internal Revenue Service is waiting for you in the hallway. You are facing a massive 10-year federal tax audit on all of your embezzled church funds. I walked down the steps of the federal courthouse, the humid Atlanta air hitting my face like a wave. The media swarmed the plaza, shouting questions about the stunning downfall of the city's most prominent pastoral family. I completely ignored them, smoothly sliding into the back seat of my waiting Maybach. The fraudulent empire of lies was dead. Exactly 1 full month later, the physical dismantling of that fraudulent empire began. I stood on the grounds of the former Adams megachurch. The autumn wind whipped my trench coat as I watched a yellow bulldozer position itself in front of the main sanctuary. The building used to be a monument to my father's towering ego, a gigantic structure funded by the desperate tithes of hard-working families. Today it was simply a loud construction site. Are we ready for the demolition of the pastoral wing? Elias asked, holding a digital tablet displaying the new blueprints. Bring it all down now, I ordered. Elias quietly nodded to the site foreman. The excavator roared to life. The steel claw swung forward, crashing violently into the stained glass window of Thomas's private pastoral suite. The glass shattered, raining down onto the concrete below. The walls that once housed his hidden safe of embezzled funds and hypocritical sermons crumbled instantly into a cloud of gray dust. I watched the destruction with profound inner peace. I was actively erasing a legacy of trauma and financial abuse. The crews will have the vanity wings cleared by tomorrow morning, Elias reported. Our contractors are ready to begin immediate retrofitting. We are on schedule to open the Oak Haven Community Center and STEM Academy by the spring semester. Where the elite VIP seating once stood there would be state-of-the-art robotics laboratories. The massive, extravagant tithing halls were being converted into fully funded coding boot camps and financial literacy classrooms for underprivileged local youth from across Atlanta. I was taking the exact space where my father had exploited his community and transforming it into an institution that would actually empower them. My billions were the foundation of a real, untouchable legacy. And what about the former owners of this property? I asked, keeping my eyes fixed on the construction crews clearing away the debris. Elias smiled, a cold and satisfied expression. The Internal Revenue Service moved with terrifying efficiency. The federal tax audit uncovered a decade of severe financial mismanagement and blatant tax evasion. Thomas and Beatrice had their personal bank accounts permanently frozen and seized by the government. They were evicted from their luxury rental when their credit cards declined. They are currently living in a cheap, dirty weekly motel on the outskirts of the city, entirely dependent on public assistance. Julian is sitting in a federal holding cell awaiting trial, and his elite family has publicly disowned him. I nodded once, letting the absolute finality of their ruin wash over me. They had chosen their path the night they left me bleeding in a trauma ward. I had simply held them accountable to their own vicious rules. They worshipped money, status, and white privilege. I had systematically stripped every single ounce of that away, leaving them with nothing but the brutal, cold reality of their own reflection. Ensure the contractors prioritize the installation of the new server rooms in the West Wing, I instructed Elias, turning my attention back to the project. I want the advanced computing labs fully operational before we launch the scholarship applications. We are going to offer full-ride academic university grants to the top-performing local students. I want to build the exact safety net for these kids that my parents maliciously destroyed for me. Understood, Elias said, making a quick note on his device. The local community leaders have already expressed overwhelming support. The press has completely shifted their narrative. You are no longer the rogue daughter. You are the billionaire philanthropist who cleansed the community of a massive financial parasite. I do not care about the press, I stated firmly, walking toward the temporary administrative trailer we had set up on the edge of the property. I only really care about results. I pushed open the door to the trailer, seeking a moment of quiet to review the updated budgetary frameworks. The small office was filled with the loud, rhythmic sounds of heavy machinery tearing down the remnants of the corrupt church outside. I sat at the temporary metal desk, opening my laptop to approve the latest round of construction funding. 10 minutes later, a sharp, frantic knock on the trailer door interrupted my focus. My lead security guard, a towering man named Marcus, stepped inside. His professional demeanor was firmly in place, but his eyes betrayed a slight subtle hint of unexpected annoyance. I apologize for the interruption, Miss Adams, Marcus said, keeping his voice strictly professional. We have a situation at the main security gate perimeter. I did not look up from my screen. If it is the local news reporters again, tell them my media relations team will issue a formal press release next week. Have them clear the sidewalk. It is not the press, ma'am, Marcus clarified, stepping further into the room. There is a woman at the front gate. She bypassed the initial traffic barriers and physically blocked one of the incoming construction trucks. She is aggressively demanding to speak with you directly. My team was preparing to have her arrested for trespassing on a heavily guarded private construction site, but she claims she is your family. I stopped typing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I slowly closed the laptop screen, the sudden silence inside the trailer contrasting sharply with the roaring bulldozers outside. Describe her, I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, chilling register. She looks extremely disheveled, ma'am, Marcus reported. She arrived on foot. She is wearing a stained coat and looks like she has not slept in days. She is crying hysterically and screaming your name. She insists she is your sister. Bring her inside, I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. Do not offer her a single chair. Do not offer her a glass of water. Just escort her directly into this administrative office and stand firmly by the door. Marcus gave a sharp and professional nod. He turned on his heel and quickly exited the temporary trailer. I remained seated at my metal desk. I opened a fresh financial spreadsheet on my laptop, pretending to be deeply engrossed in the multi-million-dollar construction budget. I wanted her to wait. I wanted her to feel the agonizing, suffocating weight of her own desperation before I even bothered to look at her face. 2 minutes later, the heavy trailer door creaked open. Marcus stepped inside, holding the door wide for the woman who used to be the untouchable, glamorous queen of Atlanta high society. I slowly raised my eyes from the glowing laptop screen. The sight of Serena was genuinely shocking. The arrogant golden child who had flaunted a custom crimson silk gown just 1 month ago was completely gone. She looked like a hollow, fragile shell of a human being. Her signature blonde highlights were brassy dark at the roots and tied back in a messy, uneven knot. She wore a faded beige trench coat that was frayed at the cuffs and deeply stained near the pockets. Her expensive designer heels had been replaced by cheap, heavily scuffed sneakers. She was trembling violently, wrapping her arms tightly around her own waist, as if trying to hold her shattered identity together. "Sienna," Serena whimpered, her voice cracking immediately. She took a hesitant step forward, but Marcus instantly shifted, his massive frame physically blocking her path. You have exactly 3 minutes to explain why you are trespassing on a highly secure federal construction site, I stated coldly. I did not stand up to greet her. I did not smile. I just stared at her with the calculating, merciless gaze of an auditor reviewing a fraudulent corporate ledger. Serena let out a pathetic wet sob. She wiped her nose with the back of her frayed sleeve. Please, Sienna. I had nowhere else to go today. I walked for 5 miles just to get here. My bus pass ran out and my cell phone was completely disconnected this morning. I am entirely broke. That sounds like a personal financial crisis, I replied smoothly, leaning back in my leather executive chair. It does not explain why you are interrupting my very busy workday. Julian is gone. Serena cried, her entire body shaking as the tears finally spilled over her pale cheeks. His elite white parents completely cut us off. They hired a massive team of ruthless corporate lawyers to sever his name from their family trust entirely. He pleaded guilty to all the federal wire fraud charges yesterday to avoid a massive, highly publicized trial. The federal judge sentenced him to 15 years in a maximum security penitentiary. They took absolutely everything from us. The government seized my jewelry, my offshore accounts, and even my designer handbags to pay direct restitution to his defrauded investors. I have absolutely nothing left in this world. You are married to a convicted federal felon. I noted, my tone perfectly even. That is the direct consequence of worshipping a man who stole investor capital to fund a massive gambling addiction. Why are you bringing this pathetic sob story to me? Serena dropped heavily to her knees. The dramatic, highly theatrical gesture was exactly the same manipulative maneuver she had used her entire life to control our parents. But this time she was not performing on a pristine marble floor in a luxury country club. She was kneeling on the dirty, scuffed linoleum of a temporary construction trailer. Because we are currently living in a filthy, dangerous weekly motel. Serena wept loudly, clutching her hands together in a desperate, frantic plea. Mom and Dad are fighting every single day. The room smells like mold and we are surviving on cheap canned soup. I cannot live like this anymore. I am begging you, Sienna. I know you are building this massive community center here. I saw the local news articles about the STEM Academy and the new administrative offices. I need a job. I will take absolutely anything you have. I will work as a minimum wage receptionist. I will answer phone calls. I will sweep the floors. I just need a steady paycheck to get out of that horrible motel room. I stared down at the crying woman on the floor. She genuinely thought she could play the sister card one last time. She thought the shared biological blood in our veins would somehow magically erase the decades of psychological torture she had gleefully inflicted upon me. You want a minimum wage job? I repeated slowly, letting the heavy words hang in the silent air of the office. Yes, Serena gasped, nodding her head frantically. Please, I am your sister. We grew up in the exact same house. We share the exact same parents. You have billions of dollars, Sienna. You own this entire massive property. Hiring me would cost you absolutely nothing. It would be a tiny, insignificant drop in the bucket for your enormous company. You have to help me. You are my only hope. I stood up from my desk. I walked slowly around the metal table and stood directly over her. I looked down at her tear-stained, completely exhausted face. You did not care that we were sisters when you watched Thomas and Beatrice drain my Spelman College tuition fund to buy your imported wedding orchids. I reminded her, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper. You did not care about our shared blood when you laughed at me for working 3 retail jobs just to survive. You proudly called me a socially unfit embarrassment. You demanded that Julian's security guards throw me onto the street because my medical bandage was ruining your perfect aesthetic. You told me I was a failure while I was recovering from a horrific car crash. I was wrong, Serena wailed, reaching out her trembling hand to touch my shoe. I was blind and stupid and arrogant. Julian brainwashed me. He told me we were elite. I am so incredibly sorry. Julian did not brainwash you. I corrected her sharply, stepping back quickly to avoid her desperate touch. He just gave you the massive financial budget to be exactly who you always were. A greedy, superficial, deeply cruel person. You never worked a single honest day in your entire life. You do not know how to answer phones, and you certainly do not know how to sweep a floor. You do not want a job, Serena. You want a savior. Serena stared up at me, her eyes wide with mounting panic, as she realized her dramatic tears were completely useless against my logic. You want me to put you on my corporate payroll so you can sit in an air-conditioned office and pretend you are still part of the elite ruling class, I stated brutally. You want me to fund your easy escape from the exact poverty you laughed at me for enduring. You want a free ride. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking into a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. I will do anything. I walked back to my desk. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a single crumpled piece of paper. I walked back over and dropped the paper directly onto her lap. That is a standard application form for a local industrial temp agency, I announced coldly. They hire day laborers for the overnight shift at a packaging warehouse across town. It pays exactly minimum wage. You will stand on your feet for 10 hours a night sorting heavy cardboard boxes. It is exhausting, brutal manual labor. Serena looked down at the generic, cheap application form as if I had just handed her a venomous snake. You came here begging for a job to survive, I said, my voice carrying the absolute finality of a judge delivering a severe sentence. There is your golden opportunity. Fill it out and take the public bus to their office right now. Serena looked up at me, her face twisting with a sudden ugly flash of her old entitled rage. A warehouse? You want me, a former pageant queen, to work the night shift in a dirty warehouse? I cannot do manual labor. I am your sister. You owe me more than this. I looked at Serena, watching her contort her face in absolute indignation. Even now, completely destitute and begging on her knees, her deeply ingrained entitlement overrode her basic survival instincts. She was literally starving, yet she still felt inherently superior to the honest working-class people she now belonged with. You owe me, Serena repeated, her voice rising to a frantic, demanding screech. Mom and Dad are elderly. I am your flesh and blood. You are punishing us because you are vindictive and cruel. You have a moral obligation to pull us out of this miserable motel. I have a moral obligation to the thousands of underprivileged kids in this city who actually want to work for a better future. I corrected her, my voice turning to absolute steel. Kids who do not have elite white savior husbands. Kids whose college tuitions were not maliciously stolen by their own parents. I am building an entire academy to help them. But you do not want a job, Serena. You want a savior, and I am neither. Serena gasped loudly as if I had just struck her across the face. I did not give her another second to argue or formulate a new manipulation tactic. I signaled to my head of security, who was still standing rigidly by the heavy trailer door. Marcus, please escort this woman off the perimeter of my property, I ordered, turning my back to her and reopening my laptop. If she attempts to bypass the security gates again, do not bring her to my office. Call the local authorities and press formal trespassing charges immediately. Yes, ma'am, Marcus replied smoothly. He stepped forward and firmly grabbed Serena by the upper arm of her heavily stained trench coat. Serena fought against his professional grip, digging her cheap sneakers into the linoleum floor. Sienna, you cannot do this to me. You are a monster. You are a cold, heartless monster. You will burn in hell for what you are doing to your own family right now. Her desperate shrieks grew fainter and fainter as Marcus dragged her out of the administrative trailer and forcefully escorted her down the long dirt path toward the main road. The heavy metal door slammed shut, cutting off her shrill voice entirely. I sat in the sudden peaceful quiet of my office, listening to the rhythmic hum of the construction machinery outside. My heart rate was completely steady. My hands were not shaking. I felt no guilt, no remorse, and absolutely no hesitation. The final toxic tie to my biological family was officially severed, and it felt exactly like drawing my very first breath of completely clean air. 6 months later, the spring air in Atlanta was warm and full of vibrant life. The massive construction project was entirely finished. The towering, ostentatious megachurch was a distant, buried memory. In its place stood the Oak Haven Community Center and STEM Academy, a stunning, sprawling complex of glass, steel, and brilliant green spaces. We had completely transformed a monument of pastoral greed into a beacon of genuine, accessible opportunity. I stood in the main courtyard, holding a pair of ceremonial golden scissors. Surrounding me were hundreds of local community members, eager high school students, and prominent city officials. The grand opening was a monumental success, but the people standing directly beside me were the ones who truly mattered. Elias, my brilliant chief operating officer, was smiling proudly. David Vance, my lead corporate litigator, stood to my left. Marcus, my towering head of security, stood watch near the main entrance, ensuring the perimeter was perfectly safe. These incredible people were my chosen family. They had proven their fierce loyalty, not through forced biological obligation, but through mutual respect, shared vision, and unwavering support. I cut the thick red ribbon and the courtyard erupted into deafening cheers. The heavy glass doors swung open, and the very first class of scholarship students flooded into the state-of-the-art robotics laboratories and advanced coding boot camps. I watched their young faces light up with pure, unadulterated joy. This was the exact legacy I wanted to leave behind. I had taken the profound pain and sheer betrayal inflicted upon me and forged it into a powerful weapon for positive, undeniable change. Later that evening, after the enthusiastic crowds had finally dispersed and the grand opening celebrations had drawn to a quiet close, I returned to my penthouse overlooking the heart of Midtown Atlanta. The city below was a sprawling grid of glowing golden lights and endless vibrant motion. I poured myself a single glass of vintage champagne and stepped out onto the massive open-air balcony. The cool night breeze swept through my hair. The faint, distant sounds of city traffic drifted up from the busy streets far below. I rested my hands on the smooth glass railing and looked out over the massive empire I had built from absolute scratch. My fractured ribs were fully healed. The surgical scar above my eyebrow had faded into a faint, thin silver line. It was a permanent, quiet reminder of the night I decided to choose my own survival over my family's toxic conditional validation. My parents were still living in that filthy, dangerous motel, fighting a losing, desperate battle against the federal tax authorities. Julian was settling into his long, miserable sentence in a maximum security penitentiary. Serena was likely working the overnight shift in a freezing warehouse, finally learning the harsh, brutal value of a single honest dollar. Their fraudulent empire was entirely wiped off the map, leaving absolutely no trace of their elite arrogance. I took a slow, deep sip of my champagne. The taste was incredibly sweet. For 34 years, I had allowed those people to make me feel small, insignificant, and completely unworthy of basic love. They had manipulated me, stolen from me, and ultimately left me to die when I was no longer useful to their superficial agenda. They had expected me to fade away quietly into the dark shadows. Instead, I had stepped directly into the blinding light and bought the entire building. I am Sienna. I am the sole founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Equity. I survived the darkest, most agonizing night of my entire life, and I emerged as an untouchable titan. The heavy chains of my traumatic past are permanently broken. I am surrounded by a family of my own, choosing, guarded by fierce loyalty, and living in the absolute undeniable peace of my own massive success. Thank you for watching my story to the very end. If you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your own peace and build your own empire, please let me know your story in the comments section below. Do not ever let anyone convince you that your worth is tied to their conditional approval. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and remember that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply choosing yourself and becoming completely unstoppable.